Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to the 15th lecture of Public Finance. Now we have, as I say before every lecture, that we have traveled lots of milestones up to lecture 15. We have discussed the role of the government, then various programs of the government, and we have found or discussed various tools that can be used to analyze various projects taken up by the government. And during that, in the last lecture, we came up with, in fact, in lecture 13, we closed the discussion on cost and benefit analysis, which is one of a very useful tool that can be used to evaluate various projects of the government. And then in lecture 14, we considered various hypothetical examples, cost and benefit, while conducting cost and benefit analysis. Those hypothetical examples, basically cost and benefit analysis revolves around making a list of all the costs and benefits, direct and indirect as well, then putting a dollar value on those costs and benefits, and then discounting those future benefits and costs to the present value so that they are comparable with each other, and then the project might be evaluated. Now doing that, in the last lecture we had certain examples just to see that how cost and benefit and how making a list and evaluating cost of benefits might result into mistakes. Now and where errors can take place. As we discussed that all the three steps of cost and benefit analysis are very important. So a mistake at any step might result into different outcomes and of our decision. So first we took an example of an irrigation project, hypothetical irrigation project, in which the first issue was putting a dollar value to flow of water, which was in terms of agriculture output. And then we discussed that while calculating that agriculture output in 1967 in the state of Nebraska, they did an error because they calculated the total benefit to be $2.5 million, while putting a price tag on the agriculture output or increase in agriculture output, which was attributable to the project directly. They forgot to ignore or consider the subsidy that was given by the government to those farmers. So the price was overestimated, or the benefit was overestimated, and when actual estimations later on were done, it was shown that it was not, the benefit was not $2.5 million, it was even less than $1 million. So that was one of the mistakes that we pointed out that can occur while evaluating a certain benefit or a certain cost. Then we also discussed in terms of indirect benefit was creation of a lake, and it was difficult to put a price tag on that recreational activity that is for which the lake can be used by the local community, but it can be priced by in terms of how much the people would be willing to pay for it. Then while coming to cost, we discussed that costing is again and some aspects of costing are again very debatable, because there would be direct labor and capital cost, there would be purchase of land, and then some economists might argue that in terms of high unemployment and recessions, whenever certain government project is taken up, there would be job creations, and so the cost of hiring that labor should be turned to zero because the government is creating jobs. Then there is a debate over that again, because if the government is not using deficit financing, then it is taking resources from some private sector use, so there should be an opportunity cost of that, even if the times are of a recession and high unemployment rates. And then the other thing that mattered in this irrigation project specifically was that the labor being hired must be skilled labor and not generic labor force. So that skilled labor force must be working on some other project, and they need to be attracted out of that. So it is not just simple job creation where new jobs are being created, but people are moving from and resources are moving from some other sources to this project. And so putting a dollar value to zero for the cost of labor would not be right. So you see, the thing is debatable over here. And then we made a table of all the costs and benefits to see that how various costs and various benefits might accrue in future dates, like in first year, second year, and up to we considered a scenario of n number of years for the project. The n would represent the lifetime of the project by the last year. Benefits costs might start from the start of the project, where labor and capital is employed and where land is purchased, and there is planning and engineering activities of the design. Then we made a table of it to have an understanding of that issue also. Then another example we considered was like construction of parallel roads on a highway, and new extension of an highway, you can say that. Like previously a highway is 4-lane and then it is made to a 6-lane highway, and that we also considered like cost and benefits in that term. And in order to calculate the benefit, we discussed that with extension, that extension in the highway would result into free flow of traffic, and that would reduce the average cost. So we should consider the demand of travelers on that highway, which should be a function of average cost of traveling on that highway. So if the average cost is reduced, the downward sloping demand curve would represent that demand would increase, and the average cost would be represented in terms of the fuel or any toll that is being paid, the fuel that is used or consumed while traveling, or as well as the maintenance and depreciation cost of the vehicle. Now, if the highway is 2 more lanes are built, that would represent that the cost of the trip would decrease, average cost of the trip would decrease, and that would represent more demand. And we also concluded in the end that the total benefit out of building 2 more lanes would be actually the cost savings by the existing users plus consumer surplus that existing as well as the new users get. So the total benefit would be the sum of consumer surplus and the cost savings in terms of decrease in average cost that come up. So those would be the total benefits. And then we also discussed the cost, like construction of the highway, the congestion of traffic flow during the time of construction and all that. Then we also later on we came to the health programs by the government, where we discussed that it is very difficult to assign dollar value while evaluating a project or evaluating benefits. So there, in the case of health programs, the main objective of the program is to save lives, to reduce injuries, to reduce illnesses, to reduce casualties out of accidents or out of fire or out of any fatal disease. So when evaluating certain projects of this type, which are saving lives or extending average human life or decreasing mortality rates or increasing the life expectancy at birth, so it is very difficult to put a price tag on the value of human life, so how it should be evaluated. So we discussed 2 methods that can be used. One method would be to use a discounted stream of future earnings of an individual, but this is again debatable, because in that case a rich individual would have a higher value of his life than a poor individual. And secondly, old individuals would have because they would be around the age of retirement, and young people have more earning potential, so that would again represent that value of life for a young man would be more than value of life for an older individual. So that is debatable. The second method we discussed would be that treat that extension or treat that project as public good. Specifically, we were considering the project of to redesigning an entrance to a highway and to avoid, for example, accidents. So one of the way would be to circulate a questionnaire among the users of that highway, that if we redesign that, and actually that redesigning would result into decrease in accidents and probability of accidents, and this is how much you would save in terms of your life. For example, your life would be saved, and your car damage would be saved, and how much dollar value you would assign to that, and how much you would be willing to pay for that project. Now that would be asking people to put a dollar value on their own life in a sense, so it would be easier, but then it is a public good, so there would be a problem of free riding. As always, we have discussed that free riding is part of a public good that comes along with it. And then we can use those average dollar values assigned by people as a crude index for assigning a value to human life in these sorts of projects. Then we also discussed a matter of, for example of a stadium in which construction of a stadium in which the bias of the analyst might result into the outcome which should not be either approved or rejected. So it would distort the actual result, because the bias would result into adding certain benefits which are not the true benefits of the project. It would again depend on, for example, people who considered it as a valuable project and people who would not consider it as a valuable project. So there is always a debate in assigning benefits and cost, and which we showed in, for example, the stadium project. And then we also discussed that this cost benefit analysis is a very useful tool for policymakers, because it quantifies the benefits and it quantifies the cost in terms of dollar values, and the result would be a quantifiable result of so that the project can be accepted or rejected. It would make the decision very easier for the policymaker even when the projects are listed. And we also discussed that it would also give a means of distribution of benefits and cost in terms of where the costs are accruing to and where the benefits are accruing to. So after going through this, now in lecture 15 we will be discussing the effect of government subsidies and income support program on the poor. Poverty is a very major social ill prevailing in the globe, and it is treated as responsibility of the government and people who can support other individuals to eradicate poverty across the globe. And it has been taken up at international level by various international agencies as well, like IMF and World Bank and UN, for example, and it is discussed as various forums. And based on the definition of development, I would like to add over here that previously, like in 1950s and 60s, the definition of development was like just the growth rate of GDP in the country. But then later on it evolved into the distribution from that growth, because economists felt that at first they felt that the effects of growth in GDP would automatically trickle down to all the population. But then later on it was felt that it would not happen automatically. There are certain initiatives that are required to be taken so that the benefits of that growth are trickle down to the various masses of population, so at various levels. So the whole definition of development evolved into in terms of not just the growth but also distribution of growth and who is actually benefiting from the economic growth of a country. And then there were certain indicators that have been developed, like life expectancy of birth and health indices, and then also education indices and poverty standards. So it has become very important for all the countries to be, for example, in terms of Human Development Index developed by United Nations Development Program. Dr. Mehboob ul Haq was also a part of that, and it was developed by Dr. Mehboob ul Haq and Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen actually played the key role in the development of Human Development Index, and that was basically to see where the countries fall in terms of the development at the core human level. So it is not just the GDP that is considered, or GDP per capita treated as like growth of a country, but the definition of development evolved into to include the benefits accruing from that development. But still there are like huge masses of population living in poverty across the globe. Now, based on that, like there was a very interesting example in Todaro's book based on development economics. Now, he portrayed a scenario in which there is, for example, African tribe living in far-flung area where people are very poor and they hunt for living, and it is a subsistence economy where they only consume what they produce themselves, and there are no resources of the government. And as long as that that is happening over there, that is fine. But when very next time there is, for example, development process starts, and there is a road built next to their village, and then there is a gleaming car, that is the word that they used, a gleaming car passes through that village, then the people would be looking at the stark difference of their life standards and life standards of other people. So you see, poverty is also because the poor people living among ourselves, and they live in the same country where rich people are living, and they can see the stark difference among different standards of living. So it is a social ill in terms of poverty, and it needs to be eradicated. But then eradicating that social poverty also has a cost to the government, because they need to get subsidies to finance those income support programs, and they also might cause inefficiency in the system, which we would be discussing in this lecture, which is the scope of in this lecture and the next lecture maybe. So actually poverty, it is generally assumed that poverty breeds crime and social unrest. So why is it the responsibility of the government to eradicate poverty? Can it be the responsibility be left to the charitable institutions like NGOs, or for example certain self-initiated institutions who support the poor people? Can it be left to them? So the point is that can those institutions be trusted to eradicate poverty in a country or in a society? The whole discussion revolves around that those charitable institutions are dependent upon charities by the people. So the pool of resources in terms of funds that they have is dependent upon the charities given by other people, and if that is in terms of recession, those charities, those funds would reduce. So the whole mechanism of depending upon the charitable institutions is not sustainable in terms of income support to the poor people who need to be brought up. Now in Islamic context, there is a whole system of zakat in which people give zakat on their income, and then that zakat is given to people who deserve it. But then the point is that what happens in the current, for example, capitalistic sort of economies, then there is taxation, and then it is the responsibility of government to support those individuals through various programs launched at various levels. Now during this course, because most of the books are on these topics like this are written by Western economists, so most of the examples would be from Western societies, and the programs of, for example, in this case we would be discussing various income support programs of USA, but we would also be discussing, we would also be listing such initiatives by the government of Pakistan to support the poor population and bring their life standard to at least a bare minimum living standard. And how that bare minimum living standard is defined specifically in terms of USA, for example, in terms there is a World Bank indicator which states that less than population living below a poverty line of $2 per day. Now $2 per day would mean around $60 per month, and so would that be enough? What would that buy for them? For example, would that buy just the basic nutrition and shelter and food? So, and would it also include like medical treatment for cancer, or medical, for example, if you just bring everybody up below that poverty line to that, at least that poverty line, so is it the responsibility of the government to push them on towards better living standards, or is it their responsibility? And if the government pushes them on to better living standards by giving them subsidies, would they be dependent on those subsidies for lifetime? Like the word of welfare trap mentioned in this slide, that represents that if an individual is given welfare for a longer period of time, he would be dependent on that welfare, and there would be a welfare trap of for the people who are being subsidized. So this is a very eradicating poverty is a very debatable scenario, because under capitalistic school of thought, any individual income should be based on the ability of the individual. So if incomes are to be based on abilities of the individuals, then is like any poor individuals who are living below poverty line is his ability very low, or are there lesser chances in the market for him to get a job opportunity or earn better income? So where is the fault lying and how it is to be corrected? And if the fault is corrected, are there any inefficiencies arising or decrease in efficiency? And if there is a decrease in efficiency, then that would mean that whole economy would come down to a lower level. Then how would they fund those individuals in the future? So as there is a process of cost benefit analysis which we discussed in the last lecture, considering there are costs to taking up any activity and there are benefits from any activity, so is like this matter of providing subsidies to poor people. It needs to be debated on all the grounds. It needs to be debated on the issue whether those subsidies would be distorting the market equilibrium and causing a welfare trap for those individuals. Would it be causing, for example, inefficiencies in the market, resulting into overall decrease in the efficiency level in the economy? So all of these things are very debatable, and we would be discussing them, and specifically the inefficiencies arising from providing individuals with subsidies, and we would discuss that. And all these are very debatable across the board in various countries and at international forums. And what they mostly try to do is to provide the bare minimum living standard to those poor individuals, so that they do not depend on that. They do not become dependent on that sort of mechanism, and they continue to do the effort in which we will discuss that. We need to do not go into detail right now. So then here are certain statistics of USA in terms of poverty in 1998. Now you can see that 34.5 million or 13% of the total population in 1998 in USA were classified as poor. Now that is a very big number, and it has its implications also. Now, how would be by defining their own poverty line, which we would discuss in the next slide. Poverty in the United States. Now, poverty threshold or poverty line in 1999 was established at, for a single individual, it was $8,667 per year. On one adult and two children, it was $13,410 per year, and two adults and two children, it was $16,600 per year. Now, these were the thresholds. And the poverty line was originally created by the Social Security Administration in United States of America as 3 times the cost of a nutritionally adequate diet. Why 3 times? Because one part of that income would go to purchasing that nutritionally adequate diet, and the other 3 parts would go to for other 2 parts, 2 by 3 would go to purchase of other required necessities like housing, or for example like medical care, or for traveling around, and maybe the cost spent in looking for other jobs. So this is how they defined their poverty line in USA, and actually that line was poverty line was updated annually for inflation using consumer price index. I hope you know what is consumer price index. This is another figure of poverty from 1960 to 1998 in USA. And you can see over here that from 1959 to like 1960 there was a reduction in the poverty level. Then again there was the poverty level. The lower line represents the poverty rate, and the upper line represents the number of poor individuals. Now poverty rate would be the number of poor out of the total population. Now in 1969 to 1979 the poverty rate was lower, then accounting to because of a recession the number of poor and poverty rate increased again. Then in 1984 it was stable at that level. It rose again in 1989 to 1994 specifically because of another recession coming up, and then it went down till 1999, and recently because of for example housing market crisis in 2006 and 7 the poverty rates in USA has increased to a greater extent. Now, the poverty line definition was changed during the Clinton administration, because what they considered then was that any amount that was paid to those individuals should also be included in terms of increasing their threshold. A new definition proposed during the Clinton administration would have included child care and other expenses, and would raise the threshold to almost 20,000. So all those expenses raised the poverty line to 20,000. Now the debate comes up, which we have been discussing. Don't worry, we would be discussing the Pakistan's case and any programs that come up in Pakistan, like Benazir Income Support Program was, I guess, the last one that was launched. Then there are programs like, for example, to bringing up entrepreneurs, to giving subsidized loans to younger population, graduates, for example, or giving out yellow cabs so that they can start better earning their have their earning potentials. So all these programs also include into certain government programs to eradicate poverty in the masses. Now the question is, why the government has to have such programs to aid the poor? Now the first thing is that certain people would argue that market outcomes, when we let the market freely operate, the market outcomes might result into certain less earnings for certain people that than the minimum requirement. So that is unacceptable, and so in that case, if that is the market outcome, so it is not fault of those people, it is fault of the whole system. So there is a requirement of a safety net for those individuals to by the government to sustain those individuals at least to bring them up to the minimum required. Minimum required in case of USA was defined as the 3 times of nutritionally adequate diet. It would, for example, by World Bank, the definition is like maybe one or people living above below $2 per day. They have set the borderline at $2, and below that they would say that they are poor, and at that they would be at the poverty line. Above that they would not be treated as like declared as poor population. So market outcomes may result into earnings of certain individuals for certain individuals which are less than the minimum required, and those market outcomes are, since they are attributable to the whole system and the whole market, then that is unfair, and that requires a safety net by the government, so that if income falls below that level, then government might need to support that. Now this whole context of poverty alleviation is true for all the developing countries, and through international funding agencies to by either training those individuals in terms of giving them better education, cheaper education, or funding their skill development in terms of training courses, technical training courses, and it is also done by the governments themselves in the local economy. Now there would be a disagreement on minimum requirement for survival, of course, because that is a debatable topic. As usual, there are debates in certain social issues, and one of those debates is that what is minimum required for survival. Then now policies that would consider would require equity in distribution. Now the point is that if the government is considering certain policies, and if those policies are to be applied, then those policies would require that the distribution of income among all the individuals should be equitable. Everybody should have a similar level of income. But this belief is not in accordance with the award equivalent to the ability of an individual. So there is a conflict of ideology over here. One ideology is that the income distribution should be equitable, and the other ideology is that rewards should be as per the ability of the people. If the income is equitable, that would automatically mean that people who are more able are like paying the government through taxes, and their incomes are being reduced, and through that income the subsidies are being given to those individuals who have lesser level of ability, so there would be no reward for that. Otherwise, in the opposite scenario, there would be that individuals are more able to earn either through their skills or their competence or their IQ, who are able to earn better, they should have a reward for that. Otherwise, people won't have an incentive to develop those abilities. So there is a contradictory interest over here. Based on the definition of poverty and discussion on poverty, I remember another important example. Like, let's assume that if all the individuals were asked in the start that if there was no choice before being born, there was no choice that whether you might be born as a very rich individual, for example, maybe a very important celebrity earning billions of rupees and dollars, and you might be born as a very poor individual living in slums of a country. So if the probability was same before being birth, and if the one individual before being born is asked that what should be the distribution of income, then everybody would vote that distribution of income should be equitable across the board, because nobody would take the risk of being born as a poor individual who cannot afford anything, as against certain individuals who would be born as very rich people. So that is like more philosophical or debate on moral grounds about equitable distribution, and the proponents of equitable distribution give this argument usually to support that distribution should be equitable. But then there is a capitalistic school of thought, and that school of thought is also very true, that if I work like harder than someone else, then I should be paid much better, and if you have better skills than me, then you should be paid more than me. So there are proponents of that also. So there is always a debate on that. Now coming back to the lecture, now earning according to work provide minimal support coupled with equal opportunities in the labor markets. Now when we are discussing the government support, so if those individuals are, because of market outcomes, they are not earning enough, so in that case the scenario would be that they might be earning according to the work they are doing, but considering a minimum requirement of reasonable living standard, the difference should be compensated by the government, so that there is no excessive compensation, because excessive compensation would result into inefficiencies in the market, would also result into those individuals, you can say, motivation to work and get out of that income support program, because he is getting that income support without any additional efforts. So that is the main reason of providing the minimal support. But if those individuals are expected to go to the market and for example earn a better living standard, then similar equal opportunities in the labor market should also be provided with this, coupled with this minimal level of support, so that people can become self-sustainable. Now you are currently we are discussing the importance of government programs to aid the poor, and we are also discussing how much aid should be given to the poor, and then later on we would come to the point where we would be discussing that what would be the effects of those aids by the government on the market efficiency, and how that aid might be given in certain cases. We would come to that, don't worry about it. So right now we are concerned about trade-off between equity and efficiency. Now there is a risk that when government would provide support to the individuals, they would be dependent on that support, and there is a debate that they might not be, their willingness to work would reduce. Specifically, for example, if I'm being paid like 5,000 rupees by the government, and considering my minimum living standard that I already have, now if I start working a little bit more, maybe I cross that bracket of minimum living standard, and that 5,000 income support won't be given to me anymore. So I would evaluate the cost and benefits. Just by earning maybe 1,000 rupees more, I would cross that bracket, and I would not be given any government support. So I would evaluate this 1,000 extra work that I would be doing and 5,000 income support by the government. I'm better off with that 5,000 income support by the government, so I would avoid to choose more work. So the issue is that then individuals would be, their willingness to do more effort would be reduced. So that would create an inefficiency. But then there is a debate over equity also, which we have discussed earlier in previous slides, and I have given a very different sort of an example. So in that sense, that example actually came from Todoro's book of development economics. It is a very interesting book on poverty and living standards and actually the definitions of development. Now, so there is a trade-off between equity and efficiency. Either you have more equity and less efficiency, or you have more efficiency and less equity. And we would come to that discussion when we start evaluating the effects of various government programs. Since we are moving towards practicality of the course now, so I hope you are more enthusiastic about learning various methods and how to evaluate various outcomes of the government policies. We have established the importance of the role of the government. Now we are looking at effects of various government incentives in terms of expenditure. Then there can be a more practical approach mentioned as pragmatic approach in the slide. The more practical approach would be that there is need to alter income distribution for poverty alleviation, and that alteration, because because if we want to eradicate poverty or reduce the level of poverty or tone down the level of poverty, we need to alter the income distribution. In other words, we might be it might be required that richer individuals may be taxed and poorer individuals may be subsidized through those taxes. But then that would have an effect on the efficiency. So the more practical or pragmatic approach would be looking at such income transfers in which we are trying to alter the income distribution in an economy to eradicate poverty on the effects in terms on the efficiency. So if such income transfers are reducing the efficiency, then we might be questioning such income transfers or income distribution. And if such income transfers are not reducing the efficiency, then we would be considering taking such activity of income or changing the income distribution. So again, the whole trade-off is between equity and efficiency. So whenever resources are taken away from one sector of the economy or one segment of the economy and given to other segment of the economy, it is the opportunity cost of those resources need to be considered at first hand. Just like in the case of government projects, we considered that resources are acquired from the private sector and employed in certain production of certain public good, then the opportunity cost of those resources need to be considered. So in this case also, the opportunity cost needs to be considered, because when we are taking when we are altering the income distribution that is prevailing in the economy, and we are taking some income from higher income class individuals and giving it to poorer income class, so that would mean that we are taking resources out of the hands of higher income class or citizens at higher income distribution, higher levels. So there would be an opportunity cost of those resources that we are taking out of their hands, and it should be evaluated that whether it is more efficient when the resources are in their hands, or it would be more efficient when the resources are in their hands. So since that would be a more practical approach, or more practical approach to see the outcome of altering such income distributions. I hope you are able to see over here that this whole debate about government programs to aid the poor revolves around positive economic analysis and normative economic analysis. From normative perspective, there is the debate over equity, and there is debate over that every individual should have some certain minimum level of living standard, and they should be able to sustainably acquire, for example, nutrition and healthcare, and might be education. So on the other hand, there is a positive economic perspective or positive economic approach of analyzing this whole scenario, and that is debating over the efficiency of such programs by the government and how they would affect how that efficiency would actually affect the outcome. So or how those programs would affect the outcomes in terms of the efficiency. So there is the debate is revolving around the positive and normative economic perspective of looking at things in this scenario specifically. So if net benefits from resource use is less, as we said in the practical approach or more pragmatic approach would be to look at the opportunity cost of those resources that are being taken from one sector or one segment to and given to the other segment. So if net benefits from resource use is less, ultimately everyone would be worse off, because if you, for example, if there is a lower level of efficiency in the economy, if you take resources out of the system and you give it to certain other segment of the economy, for example, if you aid the poor, then if the outcomes are inefficient, that would cause an inefficiency across the board, and that would result into lowering the efficiency level of the economy, and then that would mean that in the next period there would be lesser resources at hand to give as aid. Now the example over here, size of the pie should not decrease. The main aim is that if you know, it does not matter how you distribute the pie, but if you distribute the pie in such a way that in next period the size of the pie is reducing, then that is again very debatable, and that is from positive economic perspective, that is very dangerous for your future outcomes. Now for example, it is usually taught to us like when you are like trying to save a drowning person, you need to make sure that the other person does not take you down along with him. So you need to be careful while saving the person who's drowning. Now same scenario is being discussed over here. Now the losses in efficiency, if you are giving aid to the poor, the losses in efficiency reduces the economy's potential for jobs and more production. So that would reduce the overall income levels for even those people who were performing efficiently or who were much better off. So not now everybody would be not better off as much as they were before. So the whole scenario is revolving around the concept of whether government programs should target, when they target the aids to the poor, how that aid is to be targeted. I'm not saying that there is no way that it can be done, there is no way that poor can be supported, but the whole debate about that there should be a minimal level of safety net that should be provided, so that below that they are not poor anymore, but they should not be sustainable on that sort of level, because in most of the cases in USA, for example, they have re-evaluated their for example income support programs in most of the cases, and they have turned into, for example, an individual who's eligible for aid, he needs to do effort to look for work, for example, in all the development countries, developed countries, sorry, in all the developed countries, in most of the developed countries which are welfare states, for example, the unemployment fund is usually given to people who are unemployed at the moment, but even then during that process they are required to look for job, and even the social security service is looking for jobs for them. So, and then there are cases in which individual might need to, for example, get a training for improvement of his skills, so that his earning potential is improved. So this whole debate is that I'm not saying that such aids are disastrous to the economy, but I'm saying that economy should be sustainable on its own foundations, and that sustainability should not be challenged while trying to lift the level of living standards of certain individuals or elevating poverty, but that it should be approached in such a practical way, in such a pragmatic way, that aid to those poor should be sustainable, and that aid to poor would only be sustainable if the whole foundations on which that aid is being provided is sustainable. So this is the sense of this point over here on the slide that you are looking at, that size of the pie should not decrease with the distribution of changing the distribution of the halves that people are getting, or in other words, altering the distribution of income should not affect the size of income or efficiency of the overall economy. Then another debate is that if increased efficiency, now I'm always telling you points which are on one hand I'm saying this and on the other hand I'm saying that. So there is a joke that all the economists need need to have two hands, because they always say on one hand this and the other hand that. So now I'm going to the other hand. Now the debate about increased efficiency and job creation is that the main question would come up to the point that whether how many people are poor just because they cannot get work. Like they in most of the cases, in many cases, not most but in many cases, poor are the people who are maybe who are not able to work because of old age, or because of they are very young children, or they are not able to work because they have certain illness or disease, or maybe they are paralyzed, or maybe they have certain disability. So those might be the reasons why there are poorer people in the population. So if you are debating over efficiency and job creation, in fact not you but I am debating over efficiency and job creation, and I'm saying that such aids might not, should not distort the efficiency prevailing in the economy. So that also boils down to the point that the people I'm targeting and job creation I'm targeting for those people, I must consider that what is the part of the poor population which is not able to work at all, even if the jobs are there. So that is again another debatable point which needs to be considered while considering the government programs to aid the poor. Then another why government programs are required to support the requirement of government programs to aid the poor is those aid programs generates positive externalities of social stability. Now social stability is very important because many citizens would support such programs, even a slightly higher level of taxation, because they consider that there are certain benefits that emerge from having a social stability across the board in the economy. And so that is why there is a requirement to have safety nets which can help people, because when certain minimum level, when people go below that certain minimum level of earning, the safety nets would be working as an insurance by the government, and they would be able to maintain the minimum living standard even if their earning potential, or even if their earnings go down below that minimum level. So there are people who would consider that that social stability is a benefit to the society, and there are benefits emerging out of which can be collectively enjoyed. Then there would be people who would be considering that the export of such programs is because of there is genuine compassion in the people, and they would consider that they would feel satisfaction when certain government programs are helping people out of below poverty levels. Then there is another concept, that is that poverty breeds unrest, because as I said in the example of from that Tudaro's book, that those people would be fine when they are living in rural areas of certain far-flung African village and on a self-sustenance based economy. But as soon as there is development in the surrounding areas, and there are cars and going on the road, and maybe there are buildings, and then people would see the sheer contrast of various living standards, and that might breed unrest in the economy. And so that unrest might result into revolutions, that unrest might result into crimes and various other social ills. So if poverty breeds unrest, and if poverty breeds social illness in the economy and crimes and such activities, then that would be it would be beneficial to eradicate poverty. Now these are all the reasons which are people would justify that social stability, which is a positive externality of government programs to aid the poor, would result into such externalities, and this is how people would justify and support such government programs. Now again the debate comes up to whether the charity institutions, like maybe religious institutions and journal organizations which are working towards eradicating poverty, or should the responsibility rest on the shoulders of the government. Now as I discussed that debate again, the private sector does not have enough resources. Now these programs by the government are treated as public goods. Now the private sector does not have enough resources, and there is a problem of free riders always, because giving charity through private institutions and through religious institutions, solely depending upon such institutions to eradicate poverty or to raise income levels, no doubt they are playing their role, and that role is very important, but that role is not sustainable, considering that they are dependent upon the charity being given to them, and the support they give to the poor population is based on that charity. And in times of recessions or in difficult times, those charities might reduce, and that would automatically mean that that program is not sustainable over the longer term. On the other hand, government programs to aid the poor or bring the living standards up, make better living standards, are sustainable, and because they are dependent upon certain constant stream of cash flows, cash inflows, and they are sustainable for a longer period of time. But there would always be problems of free riders if charity institutions are dependent upon. But there are no uniform standards of distribution, no doubt, because it is very difficult for the government to evaluate who should get the what level of support, and who should be supported through giving jobs, and who should be supported through giving food stamps, and who should be supported through giving medical facilities or cheaper health insurance and all that. So the point is that it might not be fair, it might be fair, but the cost has to be borne by all the taxpayers, and there is always debate on the scenario that there are certain individuals who would say that in terms of debate over ability, there would be that if I am able to earn more, then I should be earning more, and if he is not able to earn more, why should I be supporting that individual? So the whole theme is that it might not be fair, the distribution of income might not be fair, but the cost has to be borne in terms of financing and in terms of eradicating, because it is a social ill, no doubt, and it has its consequences, and eradicating poverty would result into a positive externality in terms of social stability. Then coming back to the USA's status of certain programs. Now there are certain programs that guarantee recipients benefits as long as they meet certain eligibility tests. This slide is for the USA's perspective again. There are status tests and there are means tests. Status tests are typically tests about the disability and children and age criteria that must be met to be eligible for a program. Now there would be various programs even in Pakistan, like for example Employees Old Age Benefit Institution program provides retirement funds, but to be eligible for that program, it is only for certain registered institutions. So we would discuss that when we would come to that. So if you need to register for that program, you have to be like more than maybe 65 years of age, and you would have to be retired from certain institution which is registered that. So there are always eligibility criteria through which you can get listed into a certain program for the government support. So one type of test being used in USA is the status test, which is based on different types of programs. Either one individual has to be disabled, or he has to be a child, or maybe of specific non-workable age in which he cannot work, and there is a age criteria. So then the other test is the means test, which is basically typically about income and wealth criteria that must be met to be eligible for that program. The difference between income is like the stream of earnings that you have, and wealth is the value of the total assets that you have. So your means to have a living standard is also evaluated, and all those people actually who pass these tests, status test and means test, are registered in a program in USA for maybe through disability, or maybe child protection and child subsidy, or maybe through unemployment benefits, any sort, or maybe old age benefit in terms of which is inapplicable in Pakistan. Retirement funds, all these programs, you need to be eligible for both of them. You need to pass both these tests to be eligible. Now, in recent reforms in USA, specifically, maybe I guess in Clinton's era, I cannot pinpoint that exactly, but I guess those reforms were in Clinton's era. The reform system is that the people registered in that program need to look for a job if they are capable of working. For example, if they are not disabled or children or underage population maybe. So they need to find a job and get training in order to get the benefits from that program. In fact, in other words, they would only pay you if you are actually looking for a job, and they would only pay you if you are trying to improve your skills, and they would say that, okay, we would pay you to get this training. So by getting that training, individuals skill would improve and he would be able to get a job in the market. And then these programs are of course for a limited time period to avoid the welfare trap, so that individuals under the reform system, those programs are for limited time period, apart from certain cases like for disability or very old individual or who are not able to work, but they try to make you a productive member of the society through these programs. So they are for a limited time period, depends on the type of the program, and they are for limited time period, so that individual does not become dependent on those welfare payments. Now, for example, in Austria, they had an unemployment benefit, and I personally knew some guy who was who became a national over there. He was basically from Pakistan, and he could not find a job, so he got paid from over there in terms of unemployment benefits. But later on, what they also did was the social worker also tried to find a job for that guy, and he was like in the basic labor class, and they found a job for him very soon in for example a school, and as soon as he started getting that pay, the funds would stop coming to him. So it all depends on the willingness of an individual to come out of that, and such the welfare trap would be in a scenario in which he would be he would like to get money, he would become a free rider, for example, he would want to become a free rider. So in any case, there are basically two types of programs being run in USA. The programs, the cash programs, in which direct cash transfers are made, and then there are programs in kind, in which either food stamps or healthcare facilities, or for example schooling is provided. So this is a list of certain cash programs in USA. The first one is temporary aid to needy families. The program most identified with the welfare check also may provide for childcare expenses or job training. So one of the programs to again a temporary aid to needy families, not based on long-term accruing funds or long-term payments. Now then there is supplemental security income, which is the program that provides a cash payment to the widowed, orphaned and disabled. Now these might be a longer term program, specifically in terms of orphaned and disabled individuals. They would again support there to bring up their life standard. Then earned income tax credit, a program that increases the take-home pay of the working poor as much as $3,888 in 2000 for a family with 2 children. Now those would be sorts of tax exemptions to the poor class of the population, so that their take-home income is basically the government is foregoing its part of the revenue which is collected in terms of taxes. Which is usually collected in terms of taxes, so they are foregoing that part of their revenue and letting them take more sort of income. Again, for example, I would because I've been over there, I mentioned that, so I would quote an example of Austria. Over there they had a support program in which people below 1,000 euros of income per month were specifically mostly the students, they would be given a pass a card, and that card can be used to get discounts on theaters, that card can be used to get discounts on medical treatment, that card can be used to get discounts on transportation, in fact 50% discount on transportation and certain basic necessities, not the food and shelter thing, but the other consumption items, like even if you show that pass to your insurance company, they would give you certain medication would be given to you free of cost. So these types of welfare programs are applicable in many developed countries, and we would come to Pakistan later on. Then in-kind programs are food stamps, which are vouchers that enable a broad class of poor to purchase a wide variety of food products. Then there are WIC vouchers, which enable poor pregnant and postnatal women to purchase a narrow variety of food products, which is to support poor pregnant women basically. Then there is Medicaid program, which is a federal and state-funded program that provides healthcare services to the poor. We would discuss the efficiencies of these. Why I'm listing these programs is the main aim is that when we would be evaluating the programs, we would be evaluating some programs out of this. There are like for example, we would be evaluating Medicaid and its effects on the efficiency. We would be evaluating, for example, housing subsidy program by the USA government. So the whole aim is that when we do the economic analysis of these programs, that is why I wanted to list these programs that are being run in USA. Then the Children's Health Insurance Program is a federal program that subsidizes health insurance coverage for the working poor. Again, a sort of program which is subsidizing the health insurance, and of course such sorts of health insurance have an effect on the supply and demand of healthcare facilities, for not just for the people who are using that facility, but also for the people other than these who are not taking healthcare programs, and we would discuss an example like this later on. Then now coming down to welfare programs by the government of Pakistan, so there are certain programs which come under social security. Then there are certain programs which come under social assistance, and there are other programs. And I have taken this list from the source is Sayyid 2004 and Jamal 2010. I would briefly mention these welfare programs in Pakistan, and the last one, like Benazir Income Support Program, is not detailed in this, but we already know about it. I would mention that also. Now the first program was Servants Pension Fund, which was started in 1954, and it was a provident fund which was for old age pension. It was for government employees after their retirement, and the contribution towards that came from the employees because it was a provident fund, and also by the government through budgetary expenditure. Now then there is a public sector benevolent fund and group insurance 1969. This is a benevolent fund and a group insurance who is eligible, the public sector employees, and it is based on the employee contribution. Then employee social security institutions provide health services and cash support to private formal sector employees, which are basically based on the employee's contribution. Health services would mean that in such programs the formal sector employees can contribute, and they can then in times of dire needs they can get certain cash out of it, and they can also get health services out of it. Now employees old age benefit institutions, EOBI, a very famous institution established in 1976, old age pension, invalidity pension, survivors pension, old age cash grant. Now old age pension would be when an employee who's eligible, first let's go to that, workers of registered establishment, only the organizations that are registered with employee old age benefit institution are eligible for that, and as I discussed earlier, then there it is based on employer contribution as well as budgetary expenditure. Now old age pension would be when an individual retires, he would be getting certain amount, fixed amount for his till his lifetime. And invalidity pension, like if he because of a disability he is not able to work, in that case he would also get funds out of pension. And then there is survivor's pension, that would be for example if there are dependent an individual during his service, is there is demise of an individual and there are dependent relatives of that individual, so there would be a survivor's pension for those individuals. Then there are old age cash grants in which certain amount is directly paid to the retiring individual for maybe if he need to establish his certain resources for maybe shelter. In people might build homes out of it, people might buy cars, and people might start a business out of it. Then there is Workers' Welfare Fund, which started in 1971. It was basically a cash support program, in-kind support, cash support and in-kind support, and then based on housing facilities also. Now in-kind support in terms of housing facility, and there were workers of again registered establishments who registered with this program, and it was employee and employer's contribution which was accumulated to provide cash support or in-kind support. Then there is Workers' Children's Education Ordinance 1972, which mentioned free education of children. Now again it was for workers of registered establishment, and the source of fund was through employer contribution. Then there are social assistance programs like Zakat. This is again cash support, and it is for needy and destitute Muslims, and it is based on private contribution, and Zakat levy may be deducted from collected through accounts from the banks, and deducted from salaries of certain public sector offices or private sector offices. Then there is Pakistan Baitul Mal, and that provides cash support and in-kind support to needy people. Its a source of funding is through federal government and private contributions of the individuals. Then there are labor market programs which gives wages and subsidized credit to unemployed. That would be sort of unemployment fund in developed countries, and its source of funding is federal budget mostly. Then there are microfinance programs. Microfinance are those sort of programs which provide loans, provide financing at very lower rate of interest to individual who might need to start their businesses. And first of all, there is documentations requirements. So there are so many microfinance banks operating in the country. Their sources are various. There are government financed microfinance institutions. Then there are for example international donor agencies financed credit institutions, or maybe they also might be dependent on charity. In that case, an individual when registers with that program, he needs to show his incomes, and there are documentation requirements, and he would be given a loan of certain amount, and with very easier payback methods, and lesser interest rate than on the loan which is being taken by any other commercial bank or any other source, and because he is the poor individual. And then such sort of microfinance institutions have targeted Pakistani farmers a lot, and they have there is a whole literature on these the effectiveness of these microfinance institutions and the area that they have covered. So there are documentary requirements, there are debates about these methodologies, and there are debates over how a poor farmer would be able to meet, for example, those documentary requirements, because his assets are not his returns, and he does not keep a ledger, for example. Then he might be illiterate, so how he would be able to document that. Then another issue is that agriculture crop is very risky, and it depends on the weather. So how would he pay back if the crop is destroyed? Is there any insurance to support him in case of any risk? And if that risk is there, how the interest rate can be lower, and with greater risk the rate of interest would go higher automatically. So there are debates about such microfinance institutions. and their effectiveness, and these are the list of various welfare programs. Then again, I would like to add that there are, for example, yellow cab schemes, or the recently launched taxi scheme in Pakistan. I don't exactly remember its name, but the aim was again to provide a self-sustainable source of income to those individuals, and the cars would be leased in some sense, and they can pay back while they drive that taxi, and pay back out of their earnings to make them self-sustainable. Those were available mostly on very easy installments and very easy down payments. Then there is Benazir income support program also in Pakistan, which actually gives a cash grant to individuals who are registered with Benazir income support program, cash grant of, I guess, 1,000 rupees to per individual or per family. So all these welfare programs are launched in Pakistan either by the government or in certain cases by international donor agencies to ensure that the level of poverty alleviates. But the main aim of such poverty alleviation efforts is consideration for a passionate, for example, compassionate consideration for human life and for human values. Why should certain people be deprived of certain resources that are available abundantly in the globe? And the second aim is because the poverty breeds unrest and crimes and social instability, which is dangerous for the economy as a whole and dangerous for the society as a whole. I guess in the next slides we would be evaluating these programs of certain programs in terms of efficiency, because I guess we are out of time right now. So what I would do is I would summarize the lecture, and then in the next lecture we would jump towards evaluating these programs. So as usual, I would like to summarize the slides in terms of summarize each and every slide, so that the concept is for example fixed in our minds and we really understand what we are discussing. Actually today's lecture was basically around the debate over the government programs and why there is requirement of government programs, and are they creating efficiency, and is equitable distribution of income very important. Now basic aim was that poverty is a debate over normative and positive economics, and in this slide we said that whether the issue of poverty breeds crime and social unrest, and then we discussed that can we depend on the charitable institutions who are not sustainable, and in times of recessions they won't have enough funds to support the poor. Then we also discussed the welfare trap. This was actually the prologue of the lecture, and welfare trap is that when individuals are dependent on the welfare so much that their willingness to get out of that welfare paradigm is reduced. Then we discussed few statistics of USA, that in 1998 there were 34.5 million. This is an old statistic, but still it counts. Then there is for example the debate over the poverty line, which in USA's case defined by the Social Security Administration was that it is 3 times of the cost of nutritionally adequate diet. 3 times, because one third of it would go to purchasing, procuring that nutritionally adequate diet, and 2/3 would go to other resources that are required for the minimum bare standard of living. We discussed the poverty rates and how they have fluctuated across time in USA. And then when we would be discussing the public finance, specifically in terms of Pakistan, we would also might bring up the poverty issue again if we have time. Then we discussed that poverty line is reevaluated every year considering the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and there were changes in the definition of poverty line in the Clinton administration also. Now, why we would have government programs to aid the poor? Market outcomes might result in earning less than minimum required. So if that is fault of the market and not of the individual, then it is a social responsibility to support that individual. So it is considered unacceptable by many citizens, and there is need for a safety net. Then there is, but no doubt there is a debate over minimum level of survival, but we went through that once. So policies that would require equity in distribution. So if there is any policy to eradicate poverty, it should consider, it would be considering the equity in equitable distribution of resources of income. But then it is against the belief that award is according to ability of an individual. So that is again a debatable topic, whether to support or not to support. Well, not to support or not that debate exactly, but the debate how much to support would be the main idea behind it. Then the main aim would be to, if an individual's earning is according to his ability and to his work, but then to ensure a minimum level, there should be to bring him up to the minimal level, there should be some government support. But then with that, there should be equal opportunities in the workplace, so that everybody can find jobs which improve their living standards. Then the whole debate is around equity and efficiency, because when you the practical approach is you are going to alter the distribution of income in order to eradicate poverty, in order to ensure equitable distribution. But then there is a debate over efficiency also, because that equity, in order to ensure that equitable distribution, you would be taking resources out of more productive hands of the economy, maybe the higher income class who are investing, and you would be giving it to the poor who are not, who might not be using them efficiently. So there is a debate over equity and efficiency. And then we discussed that if the use of those resources is less in the hands of the poor than in the upper class or in the other segments of the income segments, then it would be very risky to risk the efficiency of the economy, because if the efficiency of the economy goes down, that would result into not a sustainable process, because efficiency would reduce the jobs available, and that reduction in jobs available would result into how would you be able to support them next time, for the next year maybe. So loss in efficiency reduces the economy's potential for jobs and more production. But then the debate comes out that if you are targeting the efficiency and job creation, is the majority of the poor people who need government aid are looking for jobs? Are they able to take up those jobs? So all these parameters needs to be considered. Then there is positive externality of social stability, that is like many citizens support such activities, because there are collective benefits of everybody of having a stable social standard of living. And then some people might support it out of genuine compassion, and then some people might support it out of fear that this poverty breeds unrest, this poverty breeds for example might breed revolution. So all these scenarios might come up, and there is a positive externality in terms of the social stability. Then we again had a discussion on government versus charity, which we had in the first slide. Government versus charity would mean whether to depend on the charitable institutions or the government, and we discussed that charitable institutions might not be sustainably able to support the poor, to provide the aid, because they are dependent on funds, and since it is a public good, so there are issues of free riders in that, inherent into that system, and in times of recessions they would not be able to support it. So it is basically the responsibility of the government, and that is as mentioned on the heading, why we have government programs to aid the poor. And these are few of the reasons that we have been discussing are the reason for the government programs to aid the poor. And then it is there are no uniform standards, because there are uniform standards of distribution when we are and they might not be fair for certain individuals, but that is the price that we have to pay. Then we discussed USA's entitlement program. There were any individual who needs to register to a certain program has to pass through the status test as well as the means test. Status test and means test. Status test would be typically, for example, whether he is disabled or he is a child of certain minor age, not workable, who's not in the part of the labor force, or whether he is an old individual who cannot work, a retired individual. So any type of eligibility would be defined by the program itself. And then there is a means test, that considering your income and your total wealth, whether you are able to afford that living standard or not. So any individual passing these two tests would be registered in a program, and the program was reformed to make sure that individuals do not get into a welfare trap. So it was made, most of the programs are made for limited time period, and then there is a binding on the individual to find a job or to get into a job training to be eligible for that program. So then we discussed a list of various programs in USA, which is temporary aid to needy families, supplemental security income, earned income tax credit, which was like more interesting one, in which people below certain income level, when they are taxed, the government is letting go of its own revenue, tax revenue, and letting them take home after tax income more than what they would be getting usually. Then there are in-kind programs, which are food stamps, WIC, and Medicaid, and the children's health insurance program, all of these with different perspectives. Then we discussed the programs by Government of Pakistan, welfare programs starting from 1954, and this is a list of various social security programs started and by the government, and we also mentioned who are eligible for it, and we also mentioned that where are the sources of funding for these social security programs. We also discussed social assurance program of Zakat and Pakistan Baitul Mal, as well as we discussed other programs like in terms of labor market and microfinance. And in terms of labor markets, they were based on basically unemployment support fund sort of program, and for Zakat and Pakistan Baitul Mal, it is by private contributions, and Baitul Mal is from federal budget, and the Zakat fund is from Zakat levies collected from various individuals, and somebody might voluntarily contribute Zakat to that Zakat fund. Then there were microfinance institutions who would give loans to for new entrepreneurs who want to establish a business but do not have necessary funds to do that. In certain cases, those microfinance institutions also monitor your activities to see if you are efficiently utilizing the resources that you have, and the rate of interest is usually low, and the installments are easy and down payment is lower. Then there are programs also in Pakistan, like for example Yellow Cab scheme and taxi schemes, and they provide taxis and yellow cabs at provided taxis and yellow cabs at a lower rate, and with easy installments, easy payments, so that to make individuals sustainable, so that they can earn their own incomes. And there are also there is also Benazir income support program, which gives around 1,000 rupees per individual or per family to support, to bring the living standard a little bit higher than it is now. Now in the next lecture we would be evaluating these programs, not like specifically these programs per se, but hypothetical examples of such programs, that how they might distort the efficient outcomes in the economy, and what is alternate means of taking the same program for the same activity but using a different means, so that it does not affect the efficiency. So hope to see you in the next lecture, lecture 16, and take care. Allah Hafiz.